The history of trade wars is as old as international commerce itself, but one of the most impactful conflicts in modern history began with the policies introduced by U.S. President Donald Trump. His administration's imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018 was not merely an economic maneuver but a geopolitical statement that sent shockwaves across global markets. This policy was part of Trump's broader America First economic agenda, designed to reduce trade deficits and revitalize domestic manufacturing. However, the ramifications of these tariffs extended far beyond the United States, triggering retaliatory actions, disrupting supply chains, and intensifying global tensions. At the heart of Trump's trade war strategy was his belief that foreign nations, particularly China, had taken advantage of the United States through unfair trade practices. The U.S. had run a significant trade deficit with China, reaching nearly $419 billion in 2018 alone. Trump viewed this imbalance as detrimental to American industry and a key factor in the decline of manufacturing jobs. In response, his administration imposed tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum imports, citing national security concerns under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This decision affected major exporters to the U.S., including Canada, Mexico, and the European Union as well as China, which responded with tariffs of its own on American goods. China's countermeasures targeted key sectors of the U.S. economy, particularly agricultural products, automobiles, and energy exports. The Chinese government imposed tariffs of up to 25% on American soybeans, pork, and other agricultural goods, significantly harming U.S. farmers, who relied heavily on exports to China. In 2017, before the trade war began, China imported approximately $12 billion worth of American soybeans, a figure that plummeted as tariffs took effect. This led the Trump administration to authorize billions in subsidies to farmers to offset their losses, further complicating the economic consequences of the conflict. Beyond agriculture, the trade war extended into the technology sector. The Trump administration imposed additional tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods, including electronics, textiles, and industrial components. China retaliated with tariffs on $60 billion of U.S. goods. However, the battle did not stop at tariffs. The U.S. also targeted Chinese technology firms, most notably Huawei, by restricting its access to American semiconductor technology. This move was driven by national security concerns, with the U.S. alleging that Chinese firms engaged in intellectual property theft and posed cybersecurity risks. The broader impact of the trade war extended to global markets. Stock markets fluctuated as investors reacted to the uncertainties surrounding international trade relations. In 2019, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, estimated that the U.S. China trade war could reduce global GDP by 0.8% by 2020, a staggering economic loss of approximately $700 billion. The effects were felt worldwide, with multinational corporations struggling to adapt to shifting trade policies. Companies reliant on global supply chains faced increased production costs, which were ultimately passed down to consumers. One of the unintended consequences of the trade war was its impact on rare earth metals. China, the world's largest producer of rare earth elements, announced restrictions on their export to the U.S. These elements are crucial for the production of high-tech goods, including smartphones, electric vehicles, and military equipment. The restriction forced the U.S. to seek alternative sources, including domestic mining and partnerships with other nations. This highlighted the vulnerability of American supply chains and intensified efforts to achieve greater economic self-sufficiency. Despite the escalating tensions, both nations eventually sought to de-escalate the trade war through negotiations. In January 2020, the U.S. and China signed the Phase 1 trade deal, in which China agreed to increase its purchase of American goods by $200 billion over 2 years. In return, the U.S. reduced some tariffs but maintained others as leverage for future negotiations. While the agreement provided temporary relief, it did not resolve the fundamental issues underlying the trade dispute, such as intellectual property rights, state subsidies, and market access. The impact of the trade war was further compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted global trade and economic activity. As supply chains collapsed and demand plummeted, both the U.S. and China faced unprecedented economic challenges. By the end of Trump's presidency, the trade war had reshaped global trade patterns, prompting businesses and governments to rethink their dependence on international supply chains. Many companies diversified their production, reducing reliance on China and shifting manufacturing to countries such as Vietnam, India, and Mexico. In the years following the trade war, the Biden administration took a different approach, focusing on rebuilding alliances with traditional partners while maintaining a tough stance on China. Tariffs remained in place, but diplomatic efforts were made to address trade disputes through multilateral agreements. The long-term effects of the trade war continue to be felt, influencing policy decisions, global economic strategies, and the future of international trade relations. Ultimately, the U.S.-China trade war was a defining moment in global economic history. It underscored the complexities of interdependent economies, the risks of protectionist policies, and the strategic importance of trade in international relations. While some industries benefited from the tariffs, many others suffered, highlighting the far-reaching consequences of trade conflicts. As the world moves forward, the lessons learned from this period will shape the future of global commerce, diplomacy, and economic policy for years to come. If you found this analysis insightful and want to stay updated on more historical and economic topics, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on global events that shape our world.